Hey guys, what's going on everyone? Welcome back to part 2 of Hard Knocks of KNOX AVE. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about now actually going through the entire week of prepping for a pop-up. And for those of you guys who are confused about why this is a part 2, definitely go check out my last video where in part 1, I talk about, basically how I come up with my schedule based off of, what we're cooking, how many days we got, and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of that is going to lead into today's episode. So in part 1, I talked about how important planning things are, like your menu and just kind of your days leading up to an event. I didn't talk about like to hour what I'm going to be doing, because in reality, there was just a lot kind of going on during that time. I was coaching football summer camp during that time, and our practices were at 5:30, so I would normally get up around 4:30, 4:45 or so. Sometimes we would be over at the freshman camp in the afternoon, and then on certain days we were with a youth program, and so there's just a lot of stuff going on. So I couldn't really plan for things to be hourly, but again, just the kind of whole idea of setting certain items that you need to get done during a certain day is the most important part. Let's get into the very first day of really prepping for this pop-up. So in part 1, I talked about picking up my briskets, a Friday before the event actually was. So not like 2 days before, but like almost a week before. So the reason for that was, as I was talking to my meat purveyor and he was telling me what days would be best for me to come in, it had to do with, when things were most available. But more importantly, it was really just to take certain things like going to a certain spot to pick up items. I wanted to do it on a day where I wasn't really doing much, so that again, as I was trying to plan my week, I didn't have one day where we were super packed and me having to drive down to the city and go up to the suburbs just to trim briskets, it was just a waste of time. After checking the briskets out, I put them in my back of my car and then drove them back up to the burbs to a barbecue restaurant to my buddy Mel's, who just recently opened up his restaurant in Park Ridge. And luckily, he had enough space for me to keep my briskets there. So huge help to know other people who got restaurants and who have extra space. So technically the next thing I had planned on my schedule was on Monday, but I decided to go to where my smoker was on the Sunday before, and I really felt like I needed to give my smoker a deep clean. And just real quick, my kind of steps of how to clean out my smoker is I always take out the grates first, give those a good scrape down. And then I'll scrape the tops of the doors. Usually there's some built up creosote and all that kind of stuff that just builds up over time. And the other thing that I do that I didn't catch on film was I'll smack the smokestack a couple times with a stick or a broom or something like that. And what you'll notice is you'll see a lot of also buildup just kind of fall down the stack as well. And once you get all that stuff that you scraped off the grates, you scraped off the top, you got out of the stack, now you can really go in there with a bench scraper and something like that and just really scrape off the bottom. Lastly, something else you can do as well to build a nice coat is kind of like I did in my previous videos of getting my smoker kind of set up and ready to go, is to get some tallow all rubbed up to the inside. And I took a torch, especially to my grates, because they had a little bit extra buildup that I couldn't get off, and just kind of burn off all the other junk off of it. So this is kind of like the very first real work day, I would say, because this has to do with more of cooking and prepping for the pop-up itself. So during this pop-up, we weren't selling meat by the pound, we were selling plates. And so I knew I didn't have to have a ridiculous amount of brisket, and so we only cooked about 10. And because I only needed to focus on cooking 10 briskets, I decided that I was gonna take my time and record some information that I haven't done enough of, and I know a lot of people have asked me for this type of information, and I felt like 10 was a pretty good number to kind of run these numbers with. So what I did was, as I was trimming all these briskets, the thing that I wanted to do was get the pre-weight trim and the post-weight trim together, just so I could, even for myself, have a better idea of what I'm dealing with in terms of weight. Because even all the restaurants that I've worked at, I didn't really focus on that kind of stuff. I didn't really understand what the average weight of our brisket was pre-trim. I definitely didn't know it was after. The only thing that I could kind of guess was, figuring out what our weight was, at the end of the day and the cook, because, I could see how much customers are buying if I stood at the front, where I was working the block and I was weighing everything out. But I didn't really have a really good idea of what was the starting weight of everything. The other thing that I did as well is take pictures of all briskets, pre-trimmed and post-trim, just to give you guys an idea about what some briskets do look like. When you're only making a handful of briskets, sometimes you just try to find the perfect briskets that you can. Or if you're making a YouTube video, you can dig through a pile and find the prettiest one, or one that you don't have to do that much work with. But when you buy a bunch and they're in cases, sometimes you have no choice, and some briskets are really ugly. And I wanted to show you guys, what I do with briskets that kind of aren't the best. I will say out of the 10 that I had, most of them were pretty dang good though. And so here are just a couple pictures of before and after the trim for you guys. So now that you guys know what the briskets look like pre and post trim, I'll just give you guys what I got in terms of the weight of these briskets. The first brisket started at 15.17 pounds and trimmed down to 9.88, 15.94 to 9.95, 14.64, 9.5, 14.5, 9.7, and lastly 16.09 to 10.88. So to answer a lot of your guys' questions of what do your briskets weigh like before and after, and how much trim do you have at the end, about that much. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, after the long morning and, just like I said, setting up the camera, doing all this kind of stuff and writing all these things down, I was pretty exhausted at the end of the day. And I was very, very close to telling myself that, hey, remember, you gave yourself Thursday and Friday to rest or to kind of catch up so you can push that other stuff later on. But I was like, no, man, I'm gonna stick to my schedule. And I also wanted to make sure, like I said, the sausage was gonna be the thing that I spend the most time on, and the thing that I wanted to take a lot of pride in. And because I haven't made sausage in a while, that was the one item on the menu that I was a little bit nervous about, because I haven't done the entire process in so long. So I kind of weighed out all the meat. I weighed up all the seasoning multiple times because I just wanted to make sure everything was right. And I wanted to give a ginormous shout out to my buddy Brad, Chud's Barbecue, who has his own YouTube channel. I'm gonna leave a link to one of his videos. It's talking about like the 5 tips to making the best sausage and stuff like that. And those things that I was worried about making this sausage in particular. Or check out the rest of his channel, and all the other food that he makes is just awesome. So definitely, if you guys aren't following him, go check him out. Tuesday started off with another early morning going to practice with our kids, and this was a day that all I was really focusing on after putting all the sausage on cure is making sure that I had all the time for today just to focus on using my new equipment with the grinder and really properly stuffing the sausage. This was a very tasking day for me. Even though there wasn't that much stuff to really do, it was just a simple task of doing the same grinding and stuffing. But other places that I was doing sausage, we were doing way more, but we had the equipment to do it. We had giant grinders, we had automatic stuffers, we had all this kind of stuff that just made this process super easy. And trying to do even 50 pounds of sausage by myself after not having done that in a while was really hard. And I'm the type of person that likes to get a lot of repetitions in, even though it does take longer. At the end of, whatever you're practicing and stuff like that, I just want to feel like I know how I'm doing things now. This is a day that I still had to go to practice in the morning. Then I had to go back to the restaurant to pick up all the sausage that I linked up the day before. Then I had to go down to the city to the meat purveyor to pick up my ribs because, again, like I said, I needed to pick up my ribs the day of because I didn't have space to store them. And I said in the last video, ribs especially are one of those products that, you know, a lot of times now we see them in vacuum sealed stuff, but you know, other places they just kind of freeze them together and they're not wrapped, they're just in a box with a kind of like plastic wrap around it. And so I went to go pick up the ribs and I wasn't super happy with them because some of them were thawed, but the ones in the middle were still a little bit solid. So I wasn't super happy, but I knew again I had some time for them to thaw because I still needed to cold smoke my sausage for a couple hours before I had to do anything with the ribs. So I've done a video in my backyard about cold smoking sausage. I'll leave a link to that up in the top for you guys to check out. But with cold smoking, it's really about having a fire that's just hot enough with a good amount of smoke that you can start to build a lot of color. There needs to be enough draw in it to slowly dry out the casings to get them to be snappy, but you can't have it be too hot and too much draw where they start to dry out, which sometimes can happen when you try to rush it where everything's fine. You're like, oh man, it's not really going as fast as I wanted to, and you bump up the temp and then you check back and they're all wrinkly. There's pockets of fat kind of throughout the sausage link, and it's just not pretty. Sometimes sausage takes 3 hours. I think these took 4.5, close to 5, but you really have to be patient with it. Make sure you put enough space in between each link as well to get enough color on all sides of it. Cleaning my grates on the Sunday before was also huge because I didn't have to wipe down the links because they didn't get super dirty. And then there's the other question of whether or not you need to put your links inside of an ice bath. I do feel like it just helps in the process of making sure your links come out as good as possible, as well as I don't want to leave out a bunch of sausage in bus tubs where they're all packed together and wait for them to cool down. If I had the ability to put all my links on trays on top of cooling racks, on top of speed racks, and wheel them into a walk-in, that's great, but I definitely don't have that. So I think an ice bath is an inexpensive way for you to make sure those links come out great. And after doing all that sausage, now it's time to get into the ribs. And this was the thing that I told you guys I was gonna talk about in part 1 was my process doing ribs. Yes, I am doing ribs 4 days before the actual event. The main reason being after I did a full brisket cook on Saturday, wake up super early to do ribs when my smoker again was, you know, in the south side of Chicago, and then I had to cook them and bring them up and set up for a pop-up. It just wasn't gonna happen. I also wanted to do ribs that were slightly different than ones that most people are used to having, and this process for me is something that I think allows me to sleep at night, but also prep things earlier and still come out with a really good product. So one of the main things that I'll do with this one is I don't use spare ribs when I do this process. I use baby backs. I think baby backs are way, way, way underutilized. I think that maybe because I grew up eating baby backs a lot, but I enjoy them a lot. And so the process of these ribs was very, very simple. I was just going to put salt and pepper on these ribs and I was gonna cook them pretty much all the way, but I just wanted to make sure I wasn't cooking them too far while running out the fat in the ribs. The reason for that is when these ribs are done, we're gonna cool them until the day of. And on the day of, we're gonna cut these ribs into individual ribs, put them into a pan and stick them in the oven until they're heated through, which is why it's really, really important not to overcook these ribs where all your fat is cooked out, because you want some of that fat to be inside the pan when it cooks. And at that point, in my personal opinion, I wouldn't be able to tell if these ribs are done before or after. And I also kind of like it that it kind of gets that second cook at a higher heat in the oven, because it starts to get a little more texture on like the exposed meat side of the ribs that you typically wouldn't be able to get if you're just getting them when they're just sliced like to order. So that's my process of doing ribs, a process that I use also when I, again, just want to be able to sleep at night. So if you guys are doing a pop-up or you want to feed your family ribs, you know, the next day, and maybe you want to feed them for dinner, but you don't have time to do it, you know, all the day of, cook the ribs ahead of time, cook them on the weekend so you can have a nice, you know, Monday or Tuesday meal where I think it tastes just as good as if you did it the day of. And this rib process is very, very similar to my fish sauce carameled ribs in that video that I made. The only difference is that, and I cut them and I put them in the pan with the fish sauce caramel on the same day, but I really could have just done that a couple days before and finished the same process as is. So after these 3 days of work, I guess technically 4 if you count the Sunday where I went to go clean the smoker, I was absolutely spent. So Thursday and Friday, I told you it was technically my off day, but it was a day where I could really just focus on, you know, I didn't have practice on Friday, but I had practice on Thursday, where I could really just focus on my kids that morning. And then later in that afternoon, we had our junior high camp, and I was able to go to that. And so having that time where, yeah, I was still doing work, but I was able to do something that I didn't feel like I had to balance between 2 different things anymore. I could just focus on those. It was awesome. And that was also a day where after doing the rib cook, I realized, oh man, I'm a little short on wood. I didn't know if I would have enough for a full brisket cook, but just in case, I was like, hey, I got time. I'm gonna go pick up some more wood, and I did that as well. It was just a time where I could be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna take care of this thing, or I'm gonna take care of that thing. I'm pretty sure on that Friday or that Thursday after I went to go pick up wood, I stopped by the grocery store as well. And then on Friday, I didn't really have that much to do other than the fact that I wanted to make sure I made an equipment list for what I needed for the brisket cook. I made barbecue sauce that I wanted to use for the ribs. It was just a super nice break from banging your head against the wall work, and then just being able to relax and just to be able to make everything seem so much more manageable after doing that for 3 days. The other thing that I wanted to do on Friday was, because I wasn't gonna be able to bring my warmer to the spot that we had the pop-up, so I had to keep all my briskets at home. Even though my oven says it goes down to 140, I was a little bit hesitant to believe that, because the last brisket cook that I did and I kept in there was really dry. And when I pulled out the brisket and when I was about to cut into it, I was like, this brisket feels way hotter than it should, because I know how certain briskets feel when they're like 145 and like 175, 180, and this thing is hot. So the entire day, I basically spent my time playing around with the oven and seeing how much it turns to actually get it to read the right temp, because it just wasn't accurate. And it explains so much, because I realized that last cook where I put that brisket in there, it definitely was way too hot, which explains so much. And it was kind of like this aha moment, and just kind of gave me more confidence for that's cooked, that I was like, oh yeah, I know that my brisket is going to be held at a proper temp. They're going to be great. Saturday now being our brisket cook day. The night before, I got some pretty decent sleep, which is rare and doesn't happen very much for me. Get there super early to my smoker, take my time seasoning all my briskets, and I made a post about this, about the way that I season my briskets. I did it the Leroy and Lewis / Louis Miller way. And I talked about in that post about, you know, just wanting to bring something different to people. It doesn't really matter whether you use this method where you're mixing in a tub, or if you have like a shaker and you're seasoning the briskets by hand. I don't know if that many people will notice a difference, but I do appreciate and I like practicing different techniques that other people that I respect a lot do. And I want to know if it makes a difference, because I don't think that many people would be able to tell, but at least I can. And these pop-ups for me are, as much as it is for other people to enjoy the food, it's for me also. I enjoy cooking. I enjoy trying out different things. And you know, the more and more I cook, I realize that a lot of these small things don't matter that much, but I do think that it's fun to practice different techniques, and it's fun to kind of feel like you're working with other people by doing things that they do. And so this day when I was cooking briskets was, again, a day where I was doing a little bit of planning, doing some logistical stuff with the people that I was doing the pop-up with, but it was really a day of a lot of reflection, to be honest with you. The last time I did a really big pop-up using the smoker that I have, I was really stressed out. This was prior to being on Chop. This was prior to me having a lot of issues with my own imposter syndrome, my own kind of being overwhelmed by other people's expectations, being overwhelmed by anxiety and panic attacks and all this kind of stuff. But this cook just felt different. I felt like I was on my game, and I felt like everything was going as smoothly as possible. I was doing all my checks at the right time. I was ahead of the game. I was ripping paper for the wrap ahead of time. My temps were really nice and even throughout. Close on the stacks at the right time to get the proper airflow to dry out my bark and to render fat. There was one brisket that was pooling a lot, but that was one brisket that I'm sure you guys had seen earlier when I was trimming briskets, a really ugly one. Yeah, that was the one that was going to be pooling, but we can't do anything about that one. But even as I was wrapping the briskets, like, I wasn't trying to do it super fast like I usually do it. I only had 10, so I was really focusing on getting all the folds correctly. The wind was blowing and it was super annoying, but yeah, I just wanted to make sure that these 10 briskets were gonna be the best briskets as possible. And even at the end of the cook, it was going on a little bit longer than I would want it to, but at the end of the day, some of those briskets were really big. And before, I would flip out and worry and freak out, like saying these briskets are gonna be horrible. But there was just something about that cook where I just felt like, nope, we're on schedule, we're on time, I'm not gonna rush it, I have nothing to worry about. I took care of everything that I needed to, and it was the most zen cook I have ever had. And to this day, that one cook to me was a reflection of a lot of things that have happened in the last 2 years. And it sounds very weird, but it felt how I used to feel when I first started cooking in the backyard, you know, where it was all just fun and just experimentation. Just the idea that, like, oh, I just get to feed people tomorrow and it's gonna be great. And I haven't felt that in a very long time, and it was awesome. So game day has arrived. So I had all my equipment lists. I was taking all my stuff there. I believe on like Thursday or Friday, I forgot what day, I did bring the ribs over to the pop-up spot, so I didn't have to make another trip that morning. But all I really had to do was grab equipment from home, bring the briskets that I had at home in the warmer or in the oven, and just bring those. And it was just kind of go time. And this was one of the times that I really almost couldn't and didn't want to set up a camera. Because one, I didn't want to be distracted by a camera, making sure it's in frame and everything is looking good, because at the end of the day, when you're feeding people, they're the ones who are most important. And I didn't want to be fiddling around with the camera. I didn't want to have to be taking off gloves and stuff like that to take pictures of things. But I was very lucky that so many people who came, took pictures and videos.
Eat some barbecue. I just stopped by the KNOX Avenue barbecue pop-up at Guild Row in Chicago. Let's go for these sticky ribs first. Look at that beautiful glaze. Super tender, nice smoky flavor. This glaze on this is delicious. Tangy, little sweet, smoky, meaty, delicious. Let's do the smoked sausage next. Look at this beautiful link, nice and plump. Nice snap from the casing, classic Texas style sausage, delicious. For last, full slice of fatty brisket. Ooh. Melts in your mouth. This is classic Texas style barbecue.
The awesome thing about this pop-up as well is the briskets that I've cooked were on point. I was basically able to cut every brisket from end to end. I had very few pieces that were crispy or just kind of too dry. The new method of cooking ribs, people seem to enjoy a lot, and I was happy that no one was saying that they taste significantly different or they didn't like it. The sausage, again, was one thing that I was worried about, because without giving people a bun or anything toppings with the Linka sausage, what would it do? And I also purposely just didn't slice it and just threw on the Linka sausage on the tray, because you know, I wanted people to have the experience of biting into the link itself. But other shout outs to just all the people that I've met in the past who show up to any event that I do, and new people that show up where I can kind of give them a little bit of idea of what I'm about and what my food is about, is also always super cool. And shout out to my guy Alvin, Cailan, who showed up in Chicago and stopped by the pop-up, man. That was it was super cool. I mean, I got to meet him when I was in California, and I got to go to Amboy. Damn, man. Alvin, what up? Earlier on as well, when I moved back home during COVID, he was one person that messaged me because he saw one of my videos, and we've been talking ever since. And he's kind of been like another big brother to me in this culinary scene. I feel like I have so many people who are like that, but the fact that he was able to drop by and, you know, try my food, and we got to talk about food and a little bit like that, was super cool. You know, I hope that he and I will link up and do something fun together in the future, whether it's in Chicago or in California. But yeah, it was a really humbling experience to feed someone like him, and again, feeding all my friends as well. It was just awesome. And serving food in that way just reminded me so much about when I first started cooking barbecue, not just for myself or my family, but doing my very first pop-ups in my backyard. Like, it really took me back to those moments where, you know, we had like 30 seats in my backyard, and people would line up by the garage to kind of turn the corner to see where we were serving the food, and it was great. That about wraps up this week of a pop-up. I didn't realize, you know, how much I had to say once I started actually trying to write different things down that I was remembering as time was going on. Doing these pop-ups is a lot of work, but there are ways to make them much easier for you. Well, that's the end of this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did so, please make sure you like this video. If there's something that you've learned that was different, tell me what you learned in the comment section down below. And if you haven't already, please make sure to press that bell notification to let you know when the next video will come out. And if you have other friends who are also planning other pop-ups, share this video with them so that they can get new info that maybe they haven't heard before. But that's it for today, guys. I'll see you guys in the next one.